So welcome, my beloved brother Aatif. I so appreciate your leadership and your consistent solidarity. As always at SETC, we begin all things by giving thanks to our creator, to the original stewards of the various lands we're on, to our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So welcome, Aatif, welcome. Can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Thank you so much for having me, Victor. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. So my name is Aatif Baskanderi. I am the CEO of the Northpine Foundation. We're a private family foundation, and some people term us as venture philanthropy, which pretty much means we kind of take a by any means necessary in how we do funding different types of impact models. But the ultimate goal is how do we sustain and scale catalytic outcomes for specific communities in Canada. So being a relatively new foundation, just about to hit 3 years young in our new orientation that we are in, we decided to pick a few communities in Canada to focus on. And 2 of them are across Canada, which is refugees and formerly incarcerated people. 2 of them are place-based, which is Scarborough in the east end of Toronto and rural and remote Newfoundland Labrador. And one of the ways that we work within these communities is in very much a solution agnostic, sector agnostic approach. So we kind of focus on what's the meaningful outcome for this community? How is it that we improve the delivery of that meaningful outcome so that they can continue to get it? And how is it that we sustain and scale those improvements, whether within the community, entrenching it, or even replication elsewhere into other contexts? That's a bit about how we operate. We're one of the largest private foundations here in Canada. We deploy anywhere between $40 to $50 million annually. And I specifically use the word deploy because, as I mentioned, in the venture philanthropy world, we don't necessarily just do grants to only charities and nonprofits. Being an agnostic group, we will pick whatever is the best financing model for whatever is the best organization that we think could be delivering this work. So we could work with charities, nonprofits, for-profit companies, community groups, whoever it might be, and we can do grants, debt, equity, a blend of finance, is because we understand that if we're actually trying to catalyze great outcomes for communities, we need to unlock all these different stakeholders in community. And opening up how we do financing and opening up our approach for what meaningful outcomes could be allows us to do that.
Ashe, that's remarkable work. And I appreciate your leadership and how clear and concise your mission and your vision and your values are. So once again, thank you for your leadership. So let me ask you another question. What inspires you currently about your work? Like what's something that's really inspiring you right now about your work at Northpine?
I think something that always inspires me is really like the beauty of humanity and kind of looking at humanity with an abundance mindset rather than a deficit mindset. When I look at all these communities, I don't look at them from a deficit lens. I look at them as opportunities. In the business world, you might call it the blue ocean of thriving. These communities that may have been underserved or underinvested in a particular way, but you know that they have resilience, and you know that if you invest in them, they will thrive. And a lot of that is both investing in the communities, but also bridge building. And this is the other part that inspires me, is how is it that we can build bridges between many different people inside of communities? And that's one of the reasons I enjoy not working within a very specific sector. I enjoy working with every sector because for me, I like engaging all of humanity on this common mission in what we might call the root definition of philanthropy, which is love of humanity. And how is it that we can catalyze everyone to express their love of humanity by working in these impact models that serve each other as neighbors? I think that's the thing that really inspires me.
That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. So what challenges and barriers do you and your colleagues face? And what are some of the approaches and strategies you utilize to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, some of the challenges are, I'll talk in a few different ways. We always talk about how is it that we sustain and scale the outcomes. So there's lots of people out there doing lots of great work, creating meaningful outcomes for these populations. One of our challenges is we can go and inject capital into these groups to kind of help fuel them creating those outcomes. But when we talk about sustaining and scaling outcomes, really that requires a lot of bridge building and partnerships with a lot of other people in society. And one of our challenges is what I call the lack of coordination of capital and effort when we talk about scaling these outcomes for these communities. So a part of my backstory is I've worked in the private sector, in the startup world, and the investing world. And in the private sector investing world, you have what are called series of investments. So you have like seed investments, series A, B, C, D. But what that basically means is, as an entrepreneur, if you're building a business, you know, if you can get from point A to point B, there's likely investors waiting for you at point B to go from point B to point C. And everyone's kind of keeping track where you have this trajectory that, okay, I can build my organization to scale. One of the challenges when we think about impact is that kind of coordination of capital and effort doesn't really exist. Like you have all these organizations that they can do lots of great work and they can get from point A to point B, but just because you get to point B, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have any kind of certainty that you'll get the resources that are required to continue that impact happening. That's one of the challenges that we faced. One of the other challenges is I call it the sectorization of social good in Canada, where as soon as we start talking about social good, we kind of put it all on one sector, whether it's a charity or nonprofit sector, and we say that the tool for social good is grants. But I think that's actually a challenge because you're not actually leveraging all the capital and tools available to kind of create the outcomes that are required for these communities. One of the things I like to do when I'm sitting in a conference is I ask people, I'm like, raise your hand if you've ever had a nonprofit have a meaningful impact on your life. Lots of people raise their hand. I'm like, raise your hand if you ever had a for-profit company have a meaningful impact on your life. Lots of people raise their hand. Raise your hand if you've ever had a government organization have a meaningful impact on your life. Lots of people raise their hand. Yet, when we think about traditional notions of philanthropy, we very much silo it. But we know that a human's life is not siloed. They are encountering so many different groups as they kind of go through their life. So I think kind of breaking apart the silos that we create in the sectorization of social good, both from a sector perspective and a financing perspective, is another challenge. But I'm hoping that if we do it, it brings more people to the field to kind of be a part of these movements. So some of the things that we've done at Northpine is we funded charities, non-qualified donees who are nonprofits. We funded for-profit companies, startup companies to create better services to serve refugees, for example. And working within these different groups, we end up crafting different tailored financing that helps support their impact model to get from point A to point B. And hopefully when we get to point B, they'll be able to mature their model and say, okay, we have what we have and we know how we can keep going with it. I think that's the biggest parts.
No, that's very helpful. It's a perfect segue to my next question. How do you feel about the future of philanthropy and social innovation in Canada?
I'm seeing good signals on where it's going, to be honest. I'll give the caveat that I'm kind of new to what you might call the capital P philanthropy sector. Me joining Northpine in January 2 years ago was kind of me stepping into the capital P philanthropy sector. But I'd always say, hopefully, inshallah, I've been a lowercase p philanthropy my entire life. But I think from what I see is you're seeing emerging movements where people are changing the whole like, what is the sectorization of social good? What is the financing around social good? So things like the Social Finance Fund are just like unique signals that are showing that, okay, people are thinking about financing social good in a different way. There's also other fascinating things where I speak at early stage venture capital conferences. So for the past 2 years, Northpine has spoken at both the Atlantic Venture Forum and Banff Venture Forum. And here we are speaking to very traditional red-blooded venture capitalists. And the funny thing is, when you walk in the room, the conversations that they're having is about health, education, climate, underrepresented founders. And I walk up in this stage, I'm like, all you people are talking about impact investing, you just don't call it impact investing. And I think, but it's a positive sign because it actually shows that there's many more facets of society. And in my mind, I think a big chunk of society is actually working towards social good in different ways. So I think one of the other trends that I like seeing is the bridge building between the silos, where people might just use different language, but at the end of the day, we're kind of on a similar mission. We might just have different language and different models in how we're going about it.
Absolutely. I couldn't say that enough. I think that definitely the alphabet soup of our sector sometimes creates a dynamic where these acronyms and terminology, folks are a lot of times maybe in consensus, but aren't aware. And then in other times, we use words interchangeably, like impact investing, social finance, community finance, social economy. So there is a lot of capacity strengthening to be done, and a lot of actual insights that you just pointed out that I think are very poignant and important for us to reflect on. So once again, thank you for your candor, your transparency, and your brilliance. My next question is, what is your ultimate goal? And what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues at Northpine?
I think the ultimate goal of Northpine is Canada becomes the absolute best place for anyone from any community to thrive, because we've coordinated ourselves in such a way that it just becomes a part of our structure. One of the examples that I'll give is we invest a lot in these communities. In the current state, so for example, in incarceration, we invest anywhere between $80,000 to $120,000 annually to incarcerate someone. But when I think about how is it that you shift what the outcomes look like for that person, all of a sudden, you can actually create a system that creates the best investment in that human being for their thriving. And it's something where on the refugee side, when we have refugees coming to Canada who, number one, are amazingly talented people, but more importantly, they are our neighbors and humans who are coming to live with us, how is it that we give them the potential to thrive? We know that currently speaking, refugees, they face anywhere between 5 to 10 years longer to kind of fully thrive than a traditional economic immigrant in Canada. But if they're invested in effectively, both holistically from a health perspective, but also in whatever are the means for them to pursue their livelihoods, they have the resilience to really outshine and do some amazing things. So what I would love to see is that Canada becomes the country that loves to take in refugees, because we know that this is gold that's coming to us. Like the human capital of all these beautiful people coming to us is gold. And how is it that we create a pathway for them to succeed? And this is the way that I'd like to see it for every underinvested and underserved community, is that we just see it as investing in them is not only realizing their thriving, but it's realizing all of our thriving.
Indeed, indeed. That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that and your authenticity in how you shared that. My second last question to you is, in terms of communities of faith and social innovation, Setsy's been doing some work around this for a while now, in partnership with a few other colleagues, remarkable colleagues at EDGE, the United Church of Canada, and others. And we've also been having some internal conversation around Islamic finance and zero interest. But my question to you right now is, in terms of your faith, and it's a personal question, so please feel free if I'm out of line. In terms of your faith, how does your faith inform your values and your work?
Yeah, so like Northpine Foundation isn't a faith-based foundation, but I'm very much someone who carries my values in how I work. And there's something very unique about faith, and I've done a lot of interfaith work in my background. I think it says a lot about, if you look at some of the amazing social innovations in history that have served communities in a really phenomenal way, many of them start from faith groups. I mean, we think about the fair trade movement has a huge rooting in Quakers. We think about, and I'll talk about the Islamic finance perspective. So in the Islamic finance perspective, the idea of having interest-based loans, where the interest is kind of seen as you're commodifying the finance, prohibited in Islam. But if you kind of look at the roots of it, there's actually some wisdom in there where it's saying Islam actually cares more about a partnership model than necessarily lending someone money for the sake of getting interest back. When you're in a partnership model, it's more of you're investing together in a joint success. So the example that I could give is, imagine if you had a student loan program, a traditional student loan program, where you just kind of charge a tuition plus interest payment, versus on Islamic finance side could be, instead of just charging an interest plus payment, you kind of more do an income-based repayment program. Because basically what you're saying is, in the former, someone could graduate from a degree or diploma program and might not even get the outcome that they want. Maybe they don't get the job. Maybe they don't increase their outcome. Yet they still have to pay that interest at the end of the day. And that can be very extractive, especially for a vulnerable population. On the more income-based approach, it's more of a partnership model. That's saying, like, if you get to success, the success that we're in partnership on, that you will, increase your livelihood, increase your income, then you pay back the loan. And kind of going Islamically, if you look in the Quran, it will say that any loan or any debt that is forgiven is the best kind of debt. So a loan inherently in Islam is meant to be philanthropic. But Islam also has very much a background in partnerships, co-investing, and trying to get to success together from a finance approach. So there's many different ways where you can create kind of debt-based programs where the interest or whatever may have you is forgiven, because that is seen as a positive thing Islamically. And what happens is you end up opening the door for other types of financiers who want to come in. Because especially when we look at the people that we work with, many of the most vulnerable people, is sometimes it can be difficult to give a vulnerable person a loan. I've spoken to many people who work with these communities who will say, like, I don't want to give these people a loan. What if they can't pay it back? And that's where some of these faith-based financing tools can offer a solution to say, okay, what if you treat it more as a partnership model? Or what if you treat it more as having a forgiveness model attached to it? And then you might be able to connect to other types of funders. And we know that there's still lots of faith communities who are very active in philanthropy or across Canada. So there's lots of interesting things from a social innovation perspective. It teaches you new tools that you could use. And then also from a community perspective, it brings more people to the table who are interested in these new tools.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for all those actual insights. And Jules, we appreciate you. So my last question, do you have any closing thoughts or a call to action for our listeners and our viewers?
Yes. So I guess my big closing thoughts are just continue to do the good work, continue to think creatively. And I know it can be very tricky to think in a visionary fashion in the kind of work that we do. And this is where I say bridge building is so important. Because if we want to think visionary, the only way that we can achieve big visions is by building lots of bridges and big bridges between people. So engage people with kindness, engage people with empathy to understand where each other are coming from to build those bridges. And then I'm hoping we can kind of build out this ultimately social good society as a whole in Canada, where strong bridges are built, where we're continually engaging in all of our creativity that ultimately yields the best for all of our neighbors. That's what gets me excited, and that's the kind of closing remark I'll leave for people.
Thank you so much, Aatif, for your visionary leadership and your clear commitments to community development and humanity. So appreciate all that you do for so many. And we'll close the way we began this remarkable interview by acknowledging our sustainer, our creator, by acknowledging our ancestors, by acknowledging the various stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our elders, all those who told our compassion or compensation, all the community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, my brother. I appreciate you.
Amin. Thank you so much, Victor.